Okay, back again with another weekly wrap up. I am Greg Otto, the editor in chief of Cyberscoop, and I'm here with Billy Mitchell, the editor in chief of FedScoop, and Jake Williams, the director of strategy for StateScoop, EdScoop, WorkScoop, all of the other awesome brands that we have under the SNG umbrella. It's been another week. We're heading into May, and the stories haven't stopped. I know that we've been really, really busy on the Cyberscoop side with both COVID-related and non-COVID-related stories, but I know you guys have as well. Billy, what was the highlight of your week this week?
Sure. I'll start with non-COVID related stuff. We had a big take of this massive DoD cybersecurity program that is intending to ensure that the defense industrial base, the supply chain for the entirety of the Pentagon is up to snuff when it comes to cybersecurity. It's called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. Everybody calls it CMMC, but this take that our reporter Jackson Barnett had kind of dives into some of the internal turmoil of that program. This body is obviously housed within the DoD, but they have this independent accreditation body that is meant to be the organization that trains all of the people who are going to accredit third-party organizations and contractors. But long story short, this independent body rushed out an RFP for a continuous monitoring tool and really hasn't, put together a sound plan for how they plan to acquire this. And it seems to be the thread that's pulling out of this already highly controversial program. And a lot of people are unhappy with it. This report that Jackson did has comments from a lot of private companies that are involved in this, but also quotes Frank Kendall, former head of acquisition and technology at the Pentagon several years ago under the Obama administration, saying, I kind of hope they just cancel CMMC because it's just been a little bit of a massive program. I won't call it a mess. It's a big undertaking, but a lot of people aren't happy with it because it's going to take a lot to get it going. COVID isn't helping right now because it's making that everybody can't meet and have these really integral conversations in person. They're having to do things virtual. So things are starting to get messy. And this is the time when, as of last month, it's May now, by April, they were planning to have trainers going out in the field and training people so that they could do those inspections on contractors' cybersecurity. So I don't know when this thing's going to actually hit, but it seems to be a bit of an unraveling point right now.
Let's back up a little bit. I'm confused as to whether this RFP is for the own IT of the CMMC accreditation board, or if they're looking to get this continuous monitoring tool in order to deploy across the federal landscape. And that's interesting. If it is that way, if there's competing interests when it comes to CIS's role, FedRAMP's role, and what is going on with this advisory board now.
Exactly. There's a lot of ambiguity into it. It's supposed to be a continuous monitoring tool that is supposed to look into the system of contractors. So it's not looking into federal systems, but it's the very vital layer down below federal systems when contractors connect into those systems. But it's this body that really doesn't have any federal relation, that it doesn't have any regulations that it has to adhere to. So it's kind of just going into this blindly, doing things at its whim. And it came out with this RFP out of nowhere. Nobody really was expecting it. It was a little sudden. There's no RFI that, the typical federal procurement process. People tend to do some sort of market research to alert the community that they're coming out with this plan. So there was no real alert or alarm sounded that this was happening, and people are a little peeved, like, who is this body to come out and just say this is what we're going to do? And it also seemed from Jackson's reporting that they might have had some companies already in mind for who they were going to pick to do this, which obviously is a bit of a problem when it comes to federal procurement. Again, this is an independent body, so they don't have to adhere to that, but that there's a little bit like, if they're doing this for a federal program, it's a little unclear what legal problems there might be there, and it's creating a really messy situation.
Yeah, that does sound ambiguous. And the ambiguity there is a perfect segue into a story that was popular for us this week, moving from the ambiguity of federal contracting into the ambiguity of the mobile ad space. The mobile ad networks that power all of the apps that we use on a day-to-day basis, the ecosystem there is just a mess. There are companies that do all sorts of things, and it's really, really hard to figure out how they're all integrated into the system. And there are scammers and criminals out there that take advantage of that ambiguity and like to pump malware into ads that go into phones, particularly on Android. Apple, we know, is a little bit more locked down, but on the Android side of things, this is a problem. And a mobile security company, Wandera, gave us some exclusive research this week that showed there is an app system known as StartApp, which is an ad distribution network that is feeding 600 apps with malicious advertisements that are giving criminals a way to phish people on Android. They are asking for credential logins and all types of PII, and it's just running through these ad systems like they are regular, legitimate ads. This is from a company called StartApp that is based in New York. And the way that this works is the criminals are creating ads that get fed into a system called Ad Salsa. And Ad Salsa is a pretty popular system that is based in Spain, and they're like the hosters. And then the hosters go to distributors, and the distribution network is StartApp, and StartApp feeds it into these apps that are really, really shady, but people use them anyway. They're used to gain like TikTok followers or coupons to e-commerce sites, which anybody that you would think is smart enough to look at these apps would say, oh, I probably shouldn't put this on the phone. And yet these apps have, hundred thousands of downloads. So it's clear that this is a vehicle to push malware. And it's really staggering that the ad networks are like, yeah, we'll try to vet them, and they're not really doing anything. So it just goes to show that the ad ecosystem and the ambiguity there really, really leads to security problems for everybody, whether it's public sector, private sector, what have you. If you have an Android phone, you really need to watch the apps that you're downloading, because you never know when you could be served a malicious ad.
And I know I read that story, and I saw at the bottom you had a pretty cool polling opportunity that people could click and to say who might be at fault in this long chain of you described all these different responsibilities, people pushing the ads through the system. But I'd be interested to hear what the results of that might have been. Who feels is the responsibility to make sure these ads aren't malware?
Yeah, it was kind of all over the place, because for those that aren't aware, if you check out the story on Cyberscoop, we ran a question: who should vet the digital ads to make sure they are secure? And we ran ad makers, ad networks, ad distributors, and ad hosts. And over 2/3 of the people that responded said it's up to the ad makers to make sure that their stuff is secure, which I bet there are ad makers out there that are trying to do that. But at the same time, the people making these malicious ads, the whole point is to make them malware and put them out there. So I think that there needs to be an extra layer from the networks and the distribution networks to make sure that what they're getting is, not malicious. It's almost like saying, think about it in terms of email. That would be like saying, oh, the people writing emails need to make sure that their content is secure. Well, yeah, if you're writing a phishing email, you don't really care about the security of the content of the email. So you would want to go to Gmail or Yahoo or Microsoft Office to say, hey, can you add in some protections? I think that is some of the logic that needs to follow there when it comes to the ad networks. Is that going to happen? No, absolutely not. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But again, it is definitely a problem and something to watch out for if you own an Android phone. So Jake, what about you on the State Scoop, Ed Scoop, Work Scoop side of things? What was big for you this week?
Yeah. So for us, this week was a bit of a return to normalcy, at least as much as that exists now. So, obviously coronavirus remains an important and newsworthy topic for us, but the conversation has really shifted to a what's next part of the pandemic. So people have settled into how things are going to work now. Our conversations with state, local, and higher ed tech leaders have really focused on the same topics we've always covered, but obviously with a note of coronavirus response to it. So Ben Fried had a story this week about what a vote by mail election is going to mean for state and local officials, but also, of course, the voters. The story comes from a report assembled by the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU, including a group of think tanks, and says that $400 million that Congress allotted in election assistance funds in the pandemic relief bill will not even cover the costs of switching to predominantly mail-in ballots in 5 states, much less all 50.
Wow.
So it remains to be seen, of course, how this is all going to shake out. But it's something we're certainly going to keep our eyes on. I mean, I think what we're dealing with here is that there's a good chance that our November election will not be the way that it has been in years past. The coronavirus pandemic is changing everything. We don't know what the safety is going to look like come November. So I think that election experts, state and local officials, federal officials are all looking at this and saying, well, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to make this secure? And also, how are we going to fund it? Greg, you've been following a lot of election security stuff on CyberScoop. What are you guys seeing in this space?
Yeah, it's funny. There are a lot of cybersecurity advocates that say it is safer to do it vote by mail, which I totally agree with. If you're talking about, the two sides of the coin here, whether everybody votes online and everybody votes by mail from a strictly security perspective, it's vote by mail. The internet is inherently insecure right now, and it's just not able to support the safety and security that's needed for an election. But security is obviously only one aspect of this. From an operational standpoint, there are still hurdles for vote by mail. Like, I'm just thinking it in terms of the election boards that need to count these votes. Like, we're not going to get a result hours after an election if we do vote by mail. And that's only if we consider counting those ballots on election day. Like, how does the operation work there? Like, when does this open up in terms of vote by mail? Can you start voting on Labor Day? Can you vote October 1st? Like, how does that work? And then there are some safety considerations to consider there too. We're trusting the Postal Service there? Is the Postal Service going to have designated voter pickup? Is this just going to be part and parcel, pardon the pun, part and parcel with the way that other mail gets delivered and transported? And there's a lot of other considerations that need to go into it. And I think the big factor here is time. We can't condense and solve all of those problems in 3 or 4 months. Like, that's just not going to happen. Like, this needs to be a multi-year effort, and we just don't have that kind of time. Like, as far as the 2020 election is concerned, I don't know that vote by mail can be done from an operational standpoint to the point where we get all of the votes counted that need to be counted. That being said, I would still trust that effort more than internet voting, but I don't think either is feasible for the election in November.
Right, and back when I started on FedScoop before I moved over to StateScoop and NetScoop about 6 years ago, the Postal Service was one of my first beats, and just the financial troubles, the logistical troubles that the Postal Service is still plagued by, make a vote by mail effort, a national vote by mail effort, really, really difficult. Beyond all of the things that Greg just laid out, the Postal Service has its own fair share of struggles, both when it comes to technology and logistics of delivering mail and getting all of that done. I want to talk about a couple other things that happened on StateScoop and NetScoop this week. So one is Colin Wood on our team chatted with the folks at NASIO, that's the National Association of State Chief Information Officers, about their plans for their mid-year conference that was moved online due to the coronavirus. That conference kicks off next week. It's going to feature a slate of programming very similar to what was originally proposed before the pandemic struck, obviously stripped down of all of its networking and kind of fun events because it is virtually online. But the sessions remain intact. A bunch of CIOs, a bunch of CISOs due to speak on that. And obviously, I think we can expect that the coronavirus and how states are responding to it will end up being a big part of that conversation. On the EdScoop front, on higher education, EDUCAUSE, that's the primary association group for higher ed CIOs, they held their annual ELI conference this week. ELI stands for EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative. It's all focused on the technology involved specifically in learning and teaching. The conference was originally scheduled for March, but was canceled at the last minute. It was supposed to be in Bellevue, Washington. And if you remember, in what seems like ancient history, the Seattle area, Washington area, was one of the first hotspots for the coronavirus in the US. And so they canceled that right at the last minute. One of the notable things, it was actually the kickoff for a lot of our coronavirus coverage on EdScoop, was that some of the folks who had already traveled in to Bellevue for that conference held what they called an unconference, where they all kind of got together and still hung out in conference rooms and talked through programming, even though the conference proper was canceled. So it came back in proper fashion this week via video conference. Colin Wood had a great story on EdScoop on how the rapid changes that higher ed administrators have faced as they've changed their approach going forward due to this pandemic. So, but I mean, a lot like the way that I started out the conversation, those university leaders really need to begin to prepare for the shift back to normal strategic thinking for their future. I mean, this fall, only a handful of universities have announced that they'll continue their instruction online, and a lot of them have said that they'll return to on-campus instruction this fall. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. And I think a conference and content from a conference like ELI is really going to set the standard for what universities are going to experience when we go to summer session and when we go to this fall, as we see what's next for higher ed leaders.
Yeah, getting back to normal, I think, is what's on everybody's mind, whether it's on a personal or a professional level. That's all what we're striving toward right now. So, guys, great to talk to you all. We'll do it all again next week.